As we all know, Germany started World War II in September 1st of 1939 by invading Poland, though what would have happened if they hadn't started World War II at all and stopped after Czechoslovakia, or after claiming Mefo? In this alternative history video, we'll explain what could cause the Führer to not invade, what would be the changes, both good and bad from such an act, and how the future of Germany and Europe may develop. For starters, we can simply ignore the good old joke that Dr. Morel spiked Hitler with some magic pills to not invade, or in some esoteric Nazi spirits visiting him after smoking the good stuff. The more likely outcome would be if the Allies took the Führer seriously and approached the USSR to create said anti-German coalition. The Austrian painter can't be trusted since he consumed the rest of Czechoslovakia after Munich. So the Allies, perhaps, tempted Stalin with some industrialization aid, then maybe the Soviets would glance at the German Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact proposal as a joke of sorts. This would lead to Germany being isolated in Europe from the major powers, except Italy. The Kingdom of Italy was, of course, a decent country economically with an alright military in the midst of rearmament, but let's be honest, it wouldn't be enough to assist the Germans in such a war. The Führer has gambled and his gamble didn't pay off in the end. He would have two options at this point: cut military spending and invest into a civilian economy, as any war he would cause was pointless, no matter how much methamphetamine the Wehrmacht took. In such a scenario, Germany would enter a deep recession, with standards of living plummeting, but I still think the Nazis could hold on to power in such a case. But before we continue to the real scenario, check out the social media that's pinned in the comment section, my Patreon, like the video and subscribe to the channel. In the more realistic scenario, what I think would be likely to happen is Hitler taking a strategic pause to continue building up his army. After all, he would need to build a big army to fight off everyone. Plus, Italy will be ready by the time Germany is completely ready. They'll have a big army, a big navy to fight the UK, and a big air force. Well, it's not that simple. You see, everyone else was not sitting on their hands after Hitler killed the Czechs. Poland was preparing for war, and the rest of the Allies ramped up their prep for the next one, along with the Soviets recuperating after the purge. Hitler had to launch the war in 1939, because if he waited, the opposition would grow and shrink far too much for him to digest. Besides that, there's also another big issue: the economy. While Germany did produce extremely great military equipment, the civilian front took a back seat. Besides them removing the women out of the workforce, the Nazis ran an impressive money laundering scheme, the Mefo company. Here's how it went. Hjalmar Schacht, the sixth president of the Reichsbank, had this idea to create the dummy company called Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, after a few other German companies put up 250,000 Reichsmarks. So, here is how the money scheme worked. Armaments manufacturers were contracted to produce arms and Mefo bills, or, in other words, promissory notes of exchange were drawn up by these contractors as payment for their invoice from the German Reich and accepted by the Mefo company. The bills of exchange were received by all German banks for possible rediscounting with the Reichsbank, and the bills of exchange were guaranteed by the German Reich for 5 years after issue. Most of these bills were issued from the period of 1933 to 34. Mefo bills were issued to last for 6 months initially, but with the provision for indefinite 90-day extensions. To further entice investors, Mefo bills came at an annual interest rate of 4%, which was higher than that of other trade bills at the time. To make sure the bills were never exchanged for Reichsmark, which would lead to inflation, the 90-day maturation period for the bills kept being extended until the actual maturation became 5 years by 1939. Now, all of this seems great if it were to be used to stimulate a regular economy, but most of the Mefo bills were to be paid back by companies that helped in construction of the German war machine. The debt of Germany, on paper, grew from 10 billion Reichsmarks in 1932 to 19 billion in 1938. But the 19 billion did not count the 12 billion that the private Mefo company owed. So we're looking at a number of 31 billion Reichsmarks. And how did Germany deal with this debt? Well, simple. They invaded Poland to gain whatever money they could get to repay the triple debt, since the time was up to pay them back after 5 years of issuing them at the start of Hitler's reign in Germany. The large nature of these outstandings led eventually to a bureaucratic confrontation between the Reichsbank and the finance minister in 1939, leading to the resignation of Hjalmar Schacht, the author of the whole strategy, on 20 January 1939. He also suggested Hitler spend less money on rearming and put it into the folk, but hey, that's a different topic. He also spent time in a concentration camp and was tried at Nuremberg. True story. So what am I getting to with all of this? Germany would be in a heavy recession if they continued to rearm without investing into a proper economy. A second Great Depression hitting Nazi Germany like an uppercut from Tyson. This could happen even as early as 1940, leading to the Deutsches Volk seeing the standards of living plummet, late 1920s Weimar levels of unemployment, and an overall loss of trust in the government. The populace would be very unhappy and discontent, likely protesting and causing a ruckus against the government. This Austrian painter was meant to bring a great life and prosperity. What was he doing? The generals that have been preparing for a war were suddenly getting blueballed. What was the Austrian painter doing? Eventually, the Führer would have to be ousted as the Gestapo would not be able to control most of the population revolting. With the most charismatic leader, Hitler, gone, the NSDAP would be followed suit by the ousting. Germany would be denazified by its own actions in 1941, maybe even 1942 at the latest. So, with the Nazis gone, who would rule Germany? My best guess would be this timeline's version of the CDU, but it will not be an easy victory for them. Now, why is that? In the July 1932 elections, SPD was the most popular party besides the Nazis. The people after such a government wouldn't vote for far-right parties anymore, as people from the DNVP would go on to serve the Nazi party, with Hitler not purging them too much. It would make sense for the Germans to not vote for the same boneheads. The KPD would be purged badly during Hitler's reign, and with one look at the Soviet Union, I do not think that the people would vote for them or for any far-left parties. The Centrum Party, another significant party, I believe would not garner many votes, as they were in a coalition with the same boneheads that led the country to such a large financial debt. Though, what these right-wing parties could do is form into one party, like they did in our own timeline, into the Christian Democratic Union of Germany. The new party, along with the SPD of Germany, would be in a neck-and-neck race, but I think it would win. It would be a fairly decent election result, as the right-wing, center-right-wing, and even far-right people would be somewhat pleased with a right-leaning party in power instead of a left one, prompting less people overall to revolt against the government. Reforms within the party system in general would be made, but all radical left or right parties would be banned. They would also reform the Weimar balance of power model between the Chancellor, President, and the Reichstag. During the Weimar Republic rule, the President could choose and get rid of the Chancellor. In this case, the role of the President would be to suggest the Chancellor, while the Parliament would be the one to elect them. Besides that, the President can't fire the Chancellor anymore, though the Parliament could. The Parliament would also receive more power, having to give explicit proposals of laws to approve them. This would resemble modern Germany's political system quite a bit. Of course, everything else that Hitler had done would be overturned, such as the SS, Enabling Act, discrimination against the Jews, and other things. It's likely that some Nazi politicians and members would be prosecuted if they didn't burn enough of the evidence of what they have done and plan to do. While this does sound like sunshine and rainbows, you have to remember that Germany of this timeline is in deep crap economy-wise, suffering from a big recession that they won't get out of until the late 1940s at best. Europe would, of course, breathe a sigh of relief at the fact that Germany isn't invading everyone, with them retaining to being wary of the USSR. Now, what to do with the rest of Central Europe? It is likely that the new Germany would hold a referendum on the states that would wish to leave to cool the relations with the neighbors. I predict that Bohemian Moravia will be the only candidate to leave Germany. Now, if they did, I don't think the Sudetenland would follow. Besides that, Poland will probably have to be forced to give back Teschen to the Czechs. When it comes to Hungary and the First Vienna War, they could be economically pressured into holding a referendum as well, with Western Slovakia joining back into Slovakia, while some territories with the Hungarian majority could stay. Now, is Czechoslovakia likely to form? I do believe they would temporarily, but they would split like in our own timeline. Now, let's look at Asia. Japan would be stuck nose deep within China, the prey being too much for the snake to swallow. The only benefit they would have is that the United States embargo of oil on them would be postponed due to Japan not occupying the Vichy French colony of Indochina. This could drag into the late 1940s easily, with China coming out on top due to foreign aid and eventual Japanese exhaustion. The USSR would be giving most of the aid to the communists in China though, with the intention of all of China turning red down the line. Whether they do or not depends on how badly nationalist China is hurt and how much aid is given to the Chinese communists. Though I believe it is unlikely they would, as the Soviets would not interfere directly, like in our own timeline, and prop up the communists in Manchuria. Speaking of the Soviet Union, Stalin would live a bit longer due to World War II not happening, but upon his death, Beria will succeed him. It is unlikely that he will be assassinated, as corn-loving Khrushchev wouldn't have the support of the army or Zhukov to put him in his place. As terrible of a person Beria was, He knew what needed to be done within the USSR. He would push hard for serious reforms like in our own timeline. This would be similar to Deng's 1978 reforms that laid the foundation for the Chinese success. They were as follows: reintroducing of private farming, end to ideologically moderate repressions, and economic cooperation with the West. Unlike in Gorbachev's time, the Chinese option would stood a good chance for success. The USSR in the early 1950s resembled China in the late 1970s. The USSR had a large pool of population in the countryside that could be released to man the expansion of low-cost manufacturing in the cities. The countryside population still remembered how to run businesses as private farmers. The national elites in the ethnic republics were still compliant and hamstrung after the bloodletting of the Great Purge. I find it more likely the Soviet Union would survive as this type of project, since the victory and great sacrifice of World War II is what kept the USSR together. If they didn't have that major event, then the USSR would likely collapse into warring states compared to that of Yugo. Now onto the USA. They would remain isolationists with an impressive economy, them perhaps bailing Germany out. It is difficult to predict who their president will be instead of FDR during the early 40s. But what can be guaranteed is that the United States of America would be competing with Germany economically. In conclusion, this world would be less technologically advanced than our own, with decolonization taking longer compared to our own timeline. The Jews likely won't have their own state due to no Holocaust, and the European population will be in a better shape. Germany would recover eventually, and be even more of an economic powerhouse compared to the rest of the world. Now, I hope everyone enjoyed the video, thank you for the view, and I'll see everyone anywhere else I plan on doing. Goodbye everyone.